Ben, can you start out by framing this by telling us what you've been doing on the ground during the protest in Seattle?
Yeah, I work for a company called Iron Oak. We provide security at a lot of the venues around Seattle and various events throughout the summertime. And the Vermilion Gallery hired us to help with facilitating their aid station last week. I started on Wednesday of last week, so it's been seven full days since I got started on that. Once that initial aid station had been set up, in working with one of our other clients down the street, they wanted to participate as well, which led our team, Alex, the owner of Iron Oak, to bring together a team of experienced medics and people with medical training to provide volunteer medics on the ground for anything necessary. Most of the red shirt medics also have combat experience, so that was another big thing that was key to the whole thing going and getting put together.
So Iron and Oak was providing two sides of ground support for the protest.
Correct.
Both on the security side, crowd control kind of things, and then on the medic side, keeping people who are injured okay, taking care of anyone who's sick, anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's correct.
And your role was on the security side.
It was a little bit of both. I do have some medical training, first aid certified, was a lifeguard as a kid. And actually through Seattle Police Department, received a certificate from a class called Stop the Bleed, which was Seattle Police Department, Seattle Fire Department, and actually Homeland Security all put together to offer this free class. So that was one of the reasons I ended up putting on medic shirt when we saw that things were going to be getting a little more intense than they had been the previous couple of days. So that was Sunday was my first day in a medical shirt, which was quite an eventful day, as we're all aware now.
When you say that you were getting indications that things were about to get more eventful, can you help people who aren't on the ground here kind of understand from your perspective what that means?
Sure. Part of this is a lot of personal experience. I've been working security and events for 15 years, and you get a read for crowds over time with more experience. And I would say that leading up to the weekend, we were a little concerned that just having Friday and Saturday be a weekend nights that people might get a little bit crazier. And what we saw all of those nights leading up to Sunday was that the crowds were pushing forward into an area that the Seattle Police Department felt was uncomfortable with them. However, they were never really proactively instigating violence with the police in any way. They were just pushing farther into the police controlled area than they wanted.
And to draw a picture for the people who aren't on the ground there, when you say controlled area, the police, because I was on the ground there also at the barricades, the police had established a neutral zone, so to speak, between the crowd and themselves, right, with barriers.
Right, and again, having done events for years and years, the way they had their barriers set up, it was almost like they were designed to fail. They were setting lines that were not static. They were not prepared to hold the static line, but were expecting the thousands and thousands of people to not push forward into that barrier. It was
against a bike rack that was like
not
even
bicycle
secure.
rack style barrier, which for when we're doing, say, live music concerts, that we use bicycle rack to direct people if they're, or maybe set the moats for liquor gardens, beer and liquor gardens.
Sure.
That's not designed to be used as a crowd control device in any way.
And certainly not for thousands of people that are angry.
Correct. And then on, I think they brought in the proper style of barricade, crowd control barricade, on between Saturday night and Sunday morning.
You're talking about the large metal walls that they put together, which were not put together correctly.
And that's the big thing. So again, we work in the music industry, and I have moved and assembled those at least 24 times with Showbox Presents events, either Showbox Soto or Both Market, or out at the park on the east side, which the name is escape, the Marymore events out there.
And a bumper shoot too.
They're big, they're heavy, and they're a pain in the butt to get to pin together right. When we showed up on the ground, they didn't even make an attempt to pin them together. So at that point, each one of those is a foldable, collapsible 250 pounds, like threat to safety. That was just the way they set them up was a threat to public safety.
What happened when people tried to point that out? Not to you, but to SPD.
So the relationship between Seattle Police Department and Iron Oak has been up and down all through this last 10, 12, 11, 12 days now. And we've gone from periods of having good contact and trying to work with each other to not at all. And right now we're on a not at all conversation. When that was pointed out to them, they basically said there's nothing we can really do about it, which is absurd to me. They weren't willing to get close. And it was pointed out to them when there was maybe at most 800 people in the immediate area. They had more than enough for resources to be able to get that properly installed in the right place, and they chose not to do so.
What would happen at an event if you were setting up those big walls like that, and say the shoe was on the other foot and SPD came up to you and said, "Hey Ben, these walls are not set up right. You have 250-pound walls that are going to collapse on people." Yeah, and you refused to fix it. What would they do?
I would get shut down immediately. That event would be over until those issues were fixed. And what I personally would do with my team, because if we had an event expecting, say, 5,000 people, we're going to have it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 security available for that. You want to stay 100 to 1 or less on a security to patron ratio, or in this case, police to protester ratio. But we would, if we had to reset that barricade, we would utilize the people who have the best communication skills to ask the crowd to step back while we reset the barricade safely for all of their sakes, but we wouldn't be shouting orders at them over a loudspeaker system. Our teams, what we would do in a crowd of that size where we're outnumbered 100 to 1, we would send our strongest voices up to that front line and calmly and firmly ask the front people to take a few steps back so that we can reset the barricade for everybody to be safe. Mm-hmm. When they had similar numbers, and I don't know that there was any right way for them to be able to reset the barricade, but I think that they had done it early when they had first been notified about it around 2 or 3 o'clock, that it could have been dealt with easily. There was under 1,000 people there at that time. They had more than enough numbers, and even if they weren't sending police right up to that front line, there's DOT workers that would have been able to do that as well, with the police backing them up from, say, 20, 30 feet away. Yelling at people at over the loudspeaker doesn't help anything. I've been kicking crowds out of nightclubs and venues for 15 years, and I've always found that talking to people on a one-to-one level, on a personal level, is always far more effective than shouting at people over a loudspeaker.
100%. I want to dive a little more into that, actually, Ben, because you do have 15 plus years of nightlife industry experience working security. As security, you're required to learn de-escalation techniques because you are not allowed to be armed with tear gas and bullets.
Correct.
So talk about, from your perspective with your security hat on, what are some crowd control measures that could be used even in a situation like the protest with thousands of people to keep things better under control without resorting to that?
They really need to have diplomatic interactions with people. Everybody is a people, and you often have to try to view things from their perspective when you're having a conversation with them, especially if they're upset about something. It's really hard to have a conversation with somebody when they're behind a gas mask or a riot shield or any of those things, and that is their only response that they know how to deal with it. Because our tools are more limited, we have to use our ability to de-escalate situations to have conversations with people one-on-one, or even in small groups or large groups. That the commanding that attention is not a issue of force. It's an issue of communication between people, and
relating to the people as human and not just as things that you're shouting at.
Correct. And when that on Saturday, when we had a lot of our very experienced event security out there, we were talking amongst ourselves that just 5 of us could go out there and get that crowd to take the 10 steps back that they needed or that the police wanted. They didn't need it, they wanted it. And 5 of us would have been able to do that just fine, but we weren't going to stand on the side of the police on this one. We had already seen the tear gas and the pepper spray that we were out there treating. You know, the reason that we got brought on is because we saw more and more of that. And well, the reason we shifted our posture from specifically offering aid stations to having medics in the field was because of the escalation of more of those techniques, using the pepper spray, using the tear gas, less than a day after the moratorium had been put in place. You know, that was mind blowing to me. I didn't even know how to react.
And that day, and that was a couple of days before that we're talking about. Yeah, and that happened in broad daylight in the afternoon.
Correct.
Totally caught people off guard. Everyone thought there was a moratorium on tear gas, so half the people, at least, that were out there were not prepared with proper mask or goggles or anything.
Yeah, my team was without our gas masks that day because we had no concerns about that issue. We were prepared for pepper spray, OCP, and that was about it. And it caught us off guard. I caught tear gas trying to get people out. The way that was Saturday, I believe, when they brought the bike cops in off of 11th. And the way that all happened was really strange. They had announced repeatedly over the loudspeaker that they were wanting people to step back. And this was before they had the proper barricades. This was just the bike rack fence.
Yeah, this was Saturday night when they moved the barricades right up and had a dialogue with those bike cops, is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. And I was at the aid station. All of a sudden, I see 100 bike cops come northbound on 11th off of Pike Street, past where we had the martial law band playing. And I had been taking a short break. I ran right out of the Vermilion Gallery and started heading towards the crowd because I knew something was going to happen. There was an accusation by the Seattle Police Department that improvised explosives had been thrown towards them.
Is this the prayer candle?
The prayer candle that got kicked over and they found on the ground after they reset lines. That was pretty crazy, and I was helping to try and get people out of the south side of the 11th and Pine intersection, and the police, the bicycle police, had set 2 lines so that the only route of exit would have been westbound on Pine Street. But they divided the crowd in such a way that it essentially boxed everybody in, and then they started using the tear gas when nobody would disperse, but there was nowhere to disperse to.
I believe this was Saturday afternoon.
Right, Saturday afternoon, about 5.
Yeah, because one of our crew, Willow, was live streaming from that, got cut off from, he was in the part of the crowd that got cut off on the Rancho Bravo side.
Yes, yeah. So it was boxed in on 3 sides with the fence of Cal Anderson Park providing the fourth wall. And then the National Guard was marched down, and people were eventually able to disperse, but it took a really long time. And because we didn't have our gas masks for the day, we had to fall back to the Chop House Row building where we had our volunteer rest area and our other forward operating base for all of our command staff to get all the communication there. That we fell back there. And even
because your HQ was right at the corner, or the HQ you were in was right at the corner of 11th and Pine.
Normally our headquarters is in the Richmark Label building, which was directly across the street from the East Precinct.
Right in the tear gas zone.
Yeah. And at times we were not able to get in or out of our offices. And so we set up a forward operations center at Chop House Row. Fortunately,
a couple blocks away.
Yeah, right. A couple blocks away. And, Liz, the owner of the building, donated all that time and space to us, and made it available, their courtyard available for a volunteer rest area off street that was secure, which was really great. And so I missed a lot of what was on the ground because I got an order to fall back since we didn't have appropriate protective gear. And I missed a lot of what was going on the ground. About 20 minutes later is when I was able to make it back out of that building. Enough tear gas had cleared. And by that time, the National Guard was lining both sides of Pine from 12th all the way down to 10th Avenue at Rancho Bravo. And
do you think that it was deliberate on their part for the mayor to declare a moratorium on tear gas to make people think that it wasn't going to happen and catch them unprepared?
If you had asked me that day, I would have said that was unlikely. According to her statements, she says that SWAT had an exemption on that, but she didn't tell anybody that for security reasons. On Saturday, I would have said it was probably a miscommunication, something like that, accidental. After my experiences on Sunday, I am more inclined to believe that it was fully intentional.
So let's talk about Sunday. So then Saturday we had that. Later Saturday night, things were more, were tense but peaceful. The barrier got moved up. They had some dialogue with the bike cops, but did not get tear gassed again that night.
Correct.
And then Sunday, I was there up until about an hour before all hell broke loose, kind of checking on my daughter who was right on the barricade line.
Yes. Things
seemed tense, but okay.
Correct. We were so we were actually at a point where we were getting ready to stand down for the night. Vermilion has been closing around 11 o'clock, and we've been shutting down the other aid station that was being supplied by Vermilion at Chop House Row around 11 o'clock as well. There was definitely some tension in the air, and this was the day we had the red shirt medics out. And part of that tension, and this is really important to cover, is before we even get to that evening, we need to talk about that afternoon with the individual that drove the car towards the crowd and fired a weapon at somebody.
Yeah, so let's back up and talk about that. Yeah. So that afternoon,
yeah,
on Sunday afternoon, before all the tear gas and stuff happened, we had a car drive into the crowd. He was stopped by one of those pieces of wall that had been taken apart by the protesters because it was unsafe.
Yeah, it collapsed. And so going back to this poorly constructed barricade, this is all kind of at the same time. I was on radio just coming out of our office, and I heard a radio call saying shots fired, which unfortunately in security business we hear too often, especially in the nightlife stuff, working in that neighborhood. But we get the location, and it's amazing how chaotic things can be, even for somebody who has 15 years of experience. I heard the location. I assumed it had to have been up near the front line, which at that point the steel barricades had collapsed, and when they fold up, the back side of them is a bunch of bars and all the moving parts that get them to stand up again. Right. Severe trip hazard. And so I'm trying to get up to that front barricade, assuming that's where the issue was. The actual issue was just south of the crosswalk on the south side of 11th and Pine. I would have passed within 30 feet of that location, trying to get to the barricades and then back down to it. And that took me maybe 45 seconds to make that trip. But what I was noticing was that huge tripping hazard of the collapsed steel barricades, and knowing that if there was a dispersal order, that hundreds of people were going to trip on that and they get trampled by anybody else coming over them. And that was a huge concern for me, but I still had not located the shooter, or I didn't even know if there was a victim at this point. Mm-hmm. I reached the vehicle and saw the ring of volunteer medics had made, and we were in our red shirts, the red shirt medics that we were deployed as that day. And one of our guys was treating a gunshot wound to upper right arm. He was able to, through our experience and training that has been provided to us over the years by our different venues and whatnot, he had gotten that arm treated, tourniqueted, and so quickly that there wasn't even blood on the ground, even though the victim had been shot by a 9mm that was very, very close to his brachial artery. It could have been an arterial issue, but it was treated, again, it was treated so fast by one of our guys that there wasn't even really blood on the ground. A couple of drops after a gunshot wound right here. I must have passed by the shooter coming from the barricade down to the car where he attempted to run into the crowd. I didn't identify him. He didn't have a weapon out at that time. Things were starting to become a little bit more chaotic. Once I assessed that the gunshot wound had been treated appropriately and was not an immediate threat to life, I tried to figure out if anybody had called 911 yet, because he was going to absolutely need to be transported to a hospital. Harborview Medical Center is one of the best trauma centers in the Northwest, and that's just about a mile from the location that we were at.
Right.
Knowing police protocols and fire department protocols that I've trained on for years with those agencies, I knew that there was no way they were going to bring a Medic 1 aid car into the protest zone. So I got on the phone with 911 and moved myself down to 11th and Pike, which at that time was open to east to westbound traffic. So 1 block south of where the shooting occurred. Once I got on the phone with 911, they let me know that they wouldn't be coming into the area. I told them I was aware of that and that I was ready to receive them at 10th and Pike, and that I could see on 11th and Pike, I could see on 11th and Union that the aid car was pulled up waiting to be able to come in. And it took another 2 to 3 minutes before police were able to get to the intersection. Again, about 100 bicycle cops were able to get to that intersection and secure it so that the Medic 1 would be able to come into the area. Once they did do it, again, knowing that they weren't going to be able to, they were not going to enter, head north of Pike on 11th. I radioed my team to let them know that they needed to start moving the victim to 11th and Pike. The aid cars weren't going to come in. We were very fortunate that the victim was able to walk under his own power. He was not a small guy. He was about 2 inches taller than me, and I'm 6'4". So that made big guy. I'm glad we didn't have to carry him. He remained conscious the whole time. And actually, as we passed him over to the Seattle Police Department, which then handed him to the medics, he walked out with a fist up in the air, in as good of spirits as you can be for
just getting shot in the arm.
Just getting shot in the arm, but also he potentially, what he was reaching for when he reached into that car is he was trying to pull the keys out of the ignition so that the guy couldn't drive any farther. The individual in the car thought that was enough of a threat that it was necessary to shoot the guy. I don't really want to speculate too much on what the intentions of the driver are. I will say the rate of speed of the car between 11th and Pike and 11th and Pine was very high. He did not appear to slow down until the metal barricade had been thrown in front of his car. That he realized he was not going to be able to do whatever it was he was going to do. I know he claims he got lost on his way to work. I would find that very hard to believe because
I find that a little sus.
So here's why I say that is my primary operations area was the corner of 10th and Pike, but I was less over the course of that week. I was less in the crowd, more on the support staff side of things, about a block away from the main protest. And every day we set up a stage in that corner for the martial law band to play. And every day I would put cones out on that crosswalk, and at some point somebody found a road closed sign that we started throwing out there too. So that individual must have driven around a road closed sign, or it might have been a sidewalk closed sign, and a series of cones that was tight enough where I had to move them for anybody to load gear, drop off donations, any of that stuff. That had been in place all week long.
Well, and I was watching the overhead camera view when all that went down, and you know, like it was pretty clear. Like watching the overhead camera view, like you could see the car coming in fast. I was watching as it all unfolded, and it was terrifying watching it from up on top, being like, "Oh my God, stop him!" You could see him get out of the car and into the crowd, but no one on the ground could tell who he was. And
yeah, and that is the nature of large crowds, is that people disappear into them very, very quickly. Even with lots of training, it's hard to identify somebody with just a glimpse. It has to be something you practice and practice and practice and practice. Even with a proper description, with that many people, there would have been no way for. But again, we were not operating in a security role. If that had happened in a nightclub, there might have been some change in a nightclub or nightlife environment. Security would have definitely been more present within the crowds of people, and we have our own protocols for dealing with that. In that situation, there was nothing anybody else could do. He's obviously a very well-educated person, knowing that he can turn himself in with no threat to his own safety. He declared his weapon, from what I understand, and was allowed behind police lanes.
And doesn't he have a brother that works in East Precinct that came out the next day, or
I have no confirmation of that. I haven't seen anything specific on that. I know that police are very closed on familial connections. They don't like to talk about it. It's not public now. So I have no confirmation one way or the other. That could just as easily be a rumor mill. However, it seemed like he was very comfortable with that situation. So that is something that will have to come out in time. You know, the courts will eventually,
figure all that out.
Go through that we'll find out. And then I would like to encourage everybody to not speculate one way or the other. If you do not have facts, and this is universal for all aspects of this movement that we're going through right now. People cannot be speculating about things they don't have direct knowledge of. If you know,
trying to control the rumor mill has been a definite issue in all this.
And something that has changed is we now, with the autonomous zone, we now control the narrative on a whole different level, because we are the only people there. There are some reporters there, and things are getting spun different ways. I would definitely encourage people to check out the New York Times article about the CHAZ that was published today. Anyway, speculation is a real bad thing to get into. And
so let's get back to, so you guys handed over the victim so that he could get to the hospital.
Got him to the hospital. I know.
And things were okay with you guys and the cops at that point?
Correct. So he actually, so once we handed him over, the crowd was kind of pushing in on police, and it was made clear, they were trying to make it clear that they were not a threat. And whoever the shift commander on that route was one of the more communicative police that I've dealt with over the last week and a half. He's somebody that I've seen before in my dealings with nightlife stuff. Even then, they were having a very hard time controlling the crowd. I would say that my red shirt medic crew, which are almost all of a nightlife event security as well, we were able to communicate to the crowd that we had to give him to the police so he could get to the hospital. After that initial interaction, I talked to that officer for a little while, and he asked what the status of the car was. At the same time, I got a radio from one of my guys saying that they had the keys to the car. And the Seattle police wanted to get the car out of there, but they were not willing to do it themselves. And so me and my team went back down to the car, unlocked the steering wheel with the ignition, put it in neutral, and we pushed that car out of that protest zone so that we could avoid a riot, so that we could de-escalate an incredibly tense situation. As you know, as people became more aware of it, even pushing that car down the street in bright red medic shirt uniforms, we had people trying to break windows, throwing stuff at us.
Wow.
And that was the level of anger as people discovered what things were. And I'm really, again, proud of the guys and gals that were working with us that day, because we were able to get that car out of there. We worked as a team. We made it so that it was not the center of violence that was going to escalate. We weren't going to let that car light on fire because we didn't want that right. We didn't want to give law enforcement the excuse to quash us, to
Do you think that would have happened if you hadn't been able to get out of there with the crowd?
Absolutely,
That car?
100%. That car would have been on fire within half an hour.
Yeah.
At 15 minutes. By thinking on our feet, we were able to get that out of there. Somewhat at the direction of the Seattle Police, but without any support from the Seattle Police.
Got it. And so then after that was during the day.
That was mid-afternoon, about 5:15, I think. So, obviously that put a lot of people on edge, and we were all a little tense for the rest of the day. Again, normally we start breaking down around 11. And I gathered the team that we had out in the red shirt medics shirts on the south side of 11th and Pine to just kind of figure out what we're getting ready to stand down. We were going to stand down on shifts, so it didn't look like we were abandoning anybody. And so we sent our first two off. I went to the Forward Operations Center at Chop House Row to start collecting gear and putting everything together. Had our second pair came back. We collected their shirts and everything was fine. And we were just waiting for that last person to make it in. And wait, were there 2 rounds of tear gas on Sunday, or was it one on? No, okay.
One on Saturday, and then the next, and then Sunday night.
It was midnight Sunday when the second round went off.
Yeah.
And so what happened on that was that we were working with not directly as part of the Red Shirt teams, but with friends of ours that work at venues around Seattle. They're called the Haas Army. And that's from our dear friend Haas, and it's his army of guys that do put on block party and Capitol block party and stuff like that. So it's kind of this inside group of elite events and nightlife security guys. They were
basically the guys that really know what they're doing when it comes to crowd control.
The top of the game in Seattle in crowd control stuff.
Right.
And they were walking around doing crowd control in the sense of stopping any agitators. We found somebody with a homeless individual that suffers from mental health issues and has drug addiction issues, and he was walking around with some weapons, and because of a personal knowledge of him, I've run into him. I had a conversation with him a few days before when I was doing an overnight. I was able to get that stick and that chain away from him just by being like, "Hey, bud, do you remember me?" Yeah. So I can't. Making people really nervous with the pointy stick and the chain. He's like, "Okay." I was like, "Can I have those?" He's like, "Yeah, here you go." So that's the kind of
de-escalation technique. You didn't shoot him with rubber bullets or tear gas him.
Right. So when the big push started around midnight on Sunday to going into Monday morning, I was back at Chop House Row when it first started. I heard the flashbangs and knew things were going to get bad. Most of the team evacuated back, and we were missing one person from the Haas Army guys. We lost one of their people out there. So me and a couple other guys went back out to try and find this individual to get them to fall back to the Chop House so that we could shelter in place until the main issues had passed. We were able to locate that person, but while we were out there, and this is a tactical mistake on my part, absolutely. I saw my good friend Robbie, who had been hanging out with Omari Salisbury all week as kind of his handler, and they were out there with one other person, pretty much on their own, trying to document the front lines of what had become a war zone. National Guard controlled the south side of the 11th and Pine intersection. The Bearcat big armored vehicles were being rolled up and down with LRAD sound cannon deployment systems in place.
Yep.
And I felt that it was my duty to go with Amari and Bobby and protect them, because they were literally being targeted as frontline journalists of this.
And for those who don't know, when you say Amari is a media person, a journalist who has been on the front lines at the barricades every day of this, has been repeatedly tear gassed, pepper sprayed, caught in flashbangs.
Yeah.
And so you knowing this, were seeing that they were targeting him again, and you were trying to protect him.
Correct. As part of my standard gear, I always wear a bulletproof vest, whether I'm, working a door at a bar on a Tuesday night, or I'm supporting the protesters so they can get their voice out there. Which I was really lucky that was the case, because in the process of providing protection for them, we were specifically being targeted from that line of National Guard. I saw one flashlight coming towards us, and I saw a second flashlight from halfway down the line coming at us. And at that point, I put my flashlight up to point back at them, which, again, technically a little unsound, but I knew what they were doing. And at that point, I was shot somewhere between 6 and 9 times by beanbags and rubber bullets. I have a beanbag shot right here in the forearm. I can send you some pictures here in a little bit. One in the knee, another one mid-thigh. My Kevlar vest absorbed at least 4 more. And one was hit by another.
Glad you had that on.
Yeah, and I also have a hard plate on. It's a soft Kevlar vest, but I have a hard plate on there. And the beanbag that hit it so hard that it actually dented the hard plate, which would have been right in the solar plexus area. If I had not been wearing a vest, that would have put me in the hospital for sure.
Kind of like what happened to the 26-year-old young woman that they hit with a flashbang or a beanbag in the chest that ended up in the hospital.
Yep, absolutely. So it was that, and again, I was in medic gear at the time. I was standing.
You were red shirt.
Yeah,
correct?
I was in a red shirt that said medic in letters this big, with the red crosses on the shoulders, and very, very clearly marked. And I was not in no way a threat to the police line. We were the police were holding the line at the the National Guard were holding a line at the south edge of 11th and Pine at the intersection there on the crosswalk. We were across the street from the gym that's between Grimm's and Queer Bar. So I would say somewhere between 175 and 225 feet away. Let's call it 200 feet away. Mm-hmm. And so what's so important about that distance is there's no way that I am a threat to anyone from that distance, especially as a medic, and using my body as a shield for somebody who's been documenting this entire movement since it got started.
Right. You were not carrying a weapon. You were not brandishing a weapon at them.
Nope. No, not at all. I had my flashlight out, and that was enough of a weapon for them. So at least they thought. I had my flashlight out because everything was dark and filled with smoke, and I was trying to find people. It was not being deployed as a measure against them in any way. So and it's going to take me probably another 2 weeks to heal up from the bruises I do have. And I will say, when they shot me in the chest and I didn't immediately hit the ground, I would say that they were targeting my crotch, and that's where I caught the round that was in the legs. So that was pretty scary.
They realized that you were wearing a vest, or you would have gone down with that hit. Yep.
Yeah, that beanbag to the center, right in the center of mass, that'll take anybody down. There's nobody who's getting up from that for a while. I mean, I would have been transported. I likely could have died if I'd not been wearing a hard plate on that Kevlar. So
And I know it was some of the Iron and Oak medic crew, going back to that 26-year-old woman that got hit in the chest.
Mhm.
You can see in the video of when that moment happened that she's knocked off her feet. I mean, she's
Yeah.
obviously much smaller than you. You're 6'4", I think.
Yeah.
She is not 6'4" and not trained in any kind of combat situation.
Correct.
She was knocked off her feet and nearly killed.
Yes.
And some of your crew saved her.
Correct. Yeah, we administered CPR and ended up getting her privately transported to the hospital since again medic 1 would not come into the area. So
So you guys she had to get to the hospital in a car with CPR
Yeah.
being performed in a car.
correct.
And for those who don't know, she is okay now. She's home and
Yep.
did survive that, thankfully.
Yes. Yeah.
So I want to talk a minute about the issue of your team, the Red Shirt medics specifically, being targeted by SPD throughout this. I talked earlier to Josh Anderson from your team,
Mhm.
and he was telling me that he felt like in the first couple of days that things were okay between you guys and SPD, and to be really clear, like all of your team are nightlife people, security people. You work with SPD all the time in your night jobs and day jobs when you're protecting venues and protecting events. You have relationships with a lot of these guys where you work side by side with them at Bumbershoot and Capitol Hill Block Party.
Correct.
And then somewhere around after that second day, as things were getting organized around supporting the protesters, there was a clear shift kind of in that
Absolutely.
relationship.
Yeah.
Can you talk to that a little bit?
I had limited interactions with SPD over the course of the entire weekend. Normally, the big shift was Saturday afternoon when they did that push and deployed tear gas after the moratorium. There was a bike cop that I recognized from East Precinct that as we got split by 2 lines of bicycle police, I was trying to grab another, again, marked red shirt medic from the second line of what they were clearing out. And he initially said, yeah, go ahead, grab your guy. And then the cop next to him disagreed with that, grabbed me by the back of the shirt and the vest and pulled me back and threw me into a wall. I knew at that point we were not going to be friends anymore. And that's part of why I was a little nervous about
that seems a bit of an unnecessary escalation.
Right? And especially, again, this is a communication issue where, you got gas masks on, you can't communicate with people on a personal level. It's completely dehumanized. And even though a previous working relationship that had been established, I had been given permission by an officer to go get the other half of my team and get them out. And what he was escorting the woman in the purple wheelchair who was pepper sprayed right behind Omari. That's who we were trying to get, and I had to go all the way around to the Rancho Bravo side to get her back out that day.
To get the woman in a wheelchair out who had been pepper sprayed in the face.
Yes. Yeah.
Who was probably not posing much of a threat as a person in a wheelchair who had just been pepper sprayed in the face.
No, and we had to operate her wheelchair for her because she wasn't able to see. Fortunately, she's fine. It's as things go, she will be fine. She stayed with us for about an hour afterwards, just kind of recovering. But yeah,
your crew had to take care of a lot of people that night.
that was Saturday. So yeah, it was a lot of people all weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Saturday afternoon when we were running, once we had one guy getting the wheelchair woman out, we were running. Each of the people in our 6-person, we had 3 2-person teams. I know I treated at least half a dozen people for tear gas or OCP on my way back to our ball point. So I would say, our team altogether treated 2 to 3 dozen people just from that Saturday night and Saturday afternoon incident alone. And the tear gas was the one that was really unexpected. Again, that was horrifying.
Again, because people were unprepared.
Correct.
Because they thought that there was a moratorium and they didn't have to worry about that for 30 days.
And that we would be able to talk to the police face to face because they would have their gas masks off as well. And that's part of the other part of the moratorium that I don't think people are giving enough weight to, is that if the police don't have to have gas masks on, we can now communicate with them on a much more direct level. And it's easier for us to follow their directions if they're, clear and meaningful, but even if it's just a dispersal order, that ability to communicate, the one person who was going to let me pass the line and the guy next to him who thought that was so much of a bad idea that I had to get thrown into a wall, which was a big cop, by the way.
Did you get his name, or was his badge number covered?
No, I have no idea. I'm not looking at that stuff when I'm.
Not when you're being thrown into the wall.
Yeah, well, if I didn't have people in distress to be concerned about, absolutely. If I was there protesting, I would have stopped. I would have turned around. I would have gotten a picture of his badge number. Absolutely. But my role there was as a medic. I was there to help people who were being attacked by CS gas and pepper spray, and that was my sole focus. The accountability of those officers. There's so much.
Well, before we get into accountability, hang on. I want to shift gears just a minute,
Sure.
Ben. So, one of the things that I'm seeing online on Facebook, as I'm trying to de-escalate in Facebook, on the Capitol Hill Facebook group, and other places where people are talking about this who aren't on the ground, is there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, well, the protesters deserve what they get. They shouldn't they shouldn't throw a bottle, they shouldn't throw a rock, or it all started because these two guys back here had a fight, and then the next thing you know, there was tear gassing. In your experience as a security person who's worked a lot of large events with large crowds, who's worked at large nightclub events, is it typical that a fight between 2 or 3 people would result in an entire crowd being tear gassed?
No, never. That would never
For
happen.
purposes of crowd control.
That would absolutely never happen.
Has that ever happened at Bumbershoot or at Capitol Hill Block Party, that any of the fights that you have had to break up between drunken people at those events, have they ever had to tear gas an entire crowd over that?
No, we've never even, I think I maybe deployed pepper spray 3 times in 15 years, and it's always been outside of a venue in a fight of 15 or more. But I've also been a part of a team of 8 guys that broke up a fight between 50 people in the basement of Barboza without tear gas or pepper spray. So it's that's up a set of stairs and 3 turns to get out of the door. So no, that would never happen.
So you would say that there are better de-escalation techniques that could be used to control the crowd than that, perhaps?
Absolutely. And if the relationship between the police department and the citizens wasn't so fractured, they would be able to move freely amongst that crowd to quell issues that are one-on-one things like that. But that trust has been broken, and they aren't able to move freely within the citizens of their own city anymore, because we don't trust them anymore.
Do you think that the police are aware that deploying tear gas in that situation isn't necessarily the best de-escalation technique?
I would. I'm
asking you to speculate, obviously.
Again, and I think that there are individual officers who would probably not know that would not be the best course of action. However, their training is to follow orders first and foremost, especially in high stress situations like that. You are always trained to follow the orders of your commanding officer. So.
Would the person who was giving those orders have known that though? Would that person be aware that that's not a great de-escalation technique in a crowd situation?
Would they be aware that it is not a de-escalation technique? Absolutely. Again, their training though is in a us versus them mentality, and we are the them. And they have been trained for years, decades, that the only way to deal with this kind of situation is mass dispersal, chemical dispersal techniques, sound dispersal techniques. Again, this is just an indicator of the broken trust between officers, officers of the law, and the citizens they protect. And then you have people like us that are actual peacekeepers out there trying to do the best we can,
totally,
with limited resources. And it's
very limited.
Yeah.
What do you think are some things that might help heal that breached trust that we have right now? Like right now, today, we have a situation where for a couple of days, East Precinct was abandoned. I mean, we knew that there were actually SPD inside the building the whole time, but abandoned, so to speak. And now they're back. What are you anticipating is going to unfold around 11th and Pine now that SPD is deliberately trying to take East Precinct back? Will there be more violence?
If there is more violence, it will not be on the part of the protesters up there. They will not. I do not foresee the protesters initiating any sort of violence. Even as it stands today, people are angry still. They are not going to stop being angry for quite some time. There are massive changes that we have to make to our systems of law enforcement before we can start really healing. If there is violence, it will not be instigated by the protesters. Have
you been hanging out up in the CHAZ in the Capitol Hill?
I've been up there. I've been up there the last couple of days. I've been up there the last couple of days, briefly, both times. Last night we actually had to move our office because the attention that was brought to our building was so high that one of the other tenants felt uncomfortable with us operating out of that office space at the Richmond building.
Heard about that.
So yesterday I was up there, but we were packing up our office to relocate that. So, but everything that I saw up there was 100% peaceful. There were
people watching social justice documentaries.
Yeah. So was it Tuesday night when it was kind of misting, and there was about 4,000, 5,000 people on the playfields of Cal Anderson, and it was slightly raining, and everybody was sitting down, and a couple of people had umbrellas, but they were broken umbrellas that had been repurposed from tear gas and pepper spray shields, and it was just such a beautiful Seattle moment. Something else that really, really struck me last night, I almost started like crying, was I was wrapping up. Actually, I'd gone back up to 12th and Pine to take some pictures to kind of combat some rumors about it being a war zone and being held by Antifa
warlords.
Yeah, or whatever that was. So I went back up there to take some pictures, and Joey Nix had just finished painting the Black Lives Matter mural on Pine Street there. So I sat and talked with him for a little while, and took those last couple pictures up on the corner of 12th and Pine, and I heard laughter from like a block away for the first time in almost 2 weeks, and it was really moving. I didn't realize that I hadn't been able to hear laughter in my neighborhood, in my city for
a while.
Yeah,
it's been very serious and intense in our hood.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben, very much. Any final things that you want to add about things, how you think things will go, how you hope things will go?
I hope that the dialogues continue. I think we're at the point where it's time to really start a public dialogue, not just activists and protesters, not just law enforcement agents or the branches of government that oversee us. Everybody needs to be involved in this because it affects everybody. If you live in Seattle or whatever city you do live in, go observe the protests if there's still active protests going on in major cities. If you live in Seattle, go check out Capitol Hill. See what it's really like. It's not unsafe in any way. It's right now.
The rumors of extortion and ID checks are
completely false.
Completely false.
100% false. I know almost every business owner in that operating area, in the CHAZ. I have worked at or worked with every single business owner in that area, and I have not heard a single peep about extortion for protection or any of that.
No. And I've been in there myself the past 2 days. It has been extremely peaceful. We have all these hippie kids digging a community garden in one part of Cal Anderson, planting a community garden, and people have their tents out and cooking hot dogs and watching movies and having conversations, which as we started out with this whole thing talking about, communication is so important. And there's certainly a lot of that happening between the protesters. What's it going to take for that to happen between the protesters and SPD.